Operation Sindoor seems to be quite different because we've now gone and attacked terrorist hubs inside Pakistan apart from POK. So how is this new doctrine playing out and evolving?
So we've been facing cross-border terrorism from Pakistan. See, first, the nature of attack was really brutal and barbaric. I mean, it isn't that people from a particular religious background were killed in a random attack. They were singled out deliberately using the most obnoxious methods and were killed in front of their family members who were then left to go and tell the story. Now, we had to react in a way that was unprecedented. Number one, that it would take them by surprise and that it would deliver a very clear message both to the international audience and to the people in Pakistan. And now they reach a point where we hit them at the core, at the what you can say is the heart of the terrorism ecosystem there. Of all of these, Bahawalpur and Muridke have a very special place.
Right.
These are the most protected sites by the Pakistan military and security establishment. They are the nurseries, the original nurseries of terrorism.
We had a tweet on President Trump's own social media handle where he said that he's brokered a deal. We've got the DGMO, the Indian DGMO, stating that, look, Pakistani counterpart, they asked for a ceasefire. The Pakistanis are saying something else. We'd still like some clarity.
No, I think it is narrative from a domestic and the international audience perspective, because there is this kind of new catchphrase, US brokered ceasefire. Right. President Trump will try to appropriate credit for something. I mean, he's in search of playing a role as a peacemaker, deal maker. He's not done that successfully. And my sense, Arjun, is that Pakistan felt the heat. If you get 11 out of their 12 air bases, that's pretty bad. That means you're, in a sense, incapacitated
completely.
Their air force. They were hoping that they would score one major successful hit.
One hit at a major army installation.
Or an Indian city. Yeah. To say that we have matched India step for step.
Why is such a long leash given to Pakistan, especially by the United States, even now? I mean, what do they have? What does Pakistan have?
They have a sort of a nuisance value for the rest of the world. They make themselves like that. It's like a thug who is also helpful to the police. Yeah. Arjun, in 2001 when 9/11 happened and then suddenly the US turned back to Pakistan. Yes. I mean, basically, President Musharraf made three different categorization. He told the Americans, you can go after Al-Qaeda. They're the ones who hit you.
Right.
We'll keep the Taliban in check. But I can't do anything about the India groups.
And of course, pay me a couple of $1 billion a year.
So every year you paid them more and more for doing less and less.
What about the European Union? I mean, as usual, their entire response has been very tepid.
I think you've raised a very valid question, because Europe in general is facing great strategic irrelevance.
Right.
In terms of competitiveness, falling behind the United States and China. They are absolutely not in the center of anything, and they really have very little impact.
Turkey has now, of course, come into our mind frames, and once the Turkish drones came over Jammu and other parts, how do you look at it diplomatically? And how did you look at it earlier? And how do you look at it now?
When I was here in the PMO, and I remember the Turkish ambassador used to come sometimes and say, why can't we have a good relationship? I used to tell them straight that, we can't have a normal relationship with you as long as you have this absolutely umbilical relationship with Pakistan, which is fine, except that the way you work on that relationship is totally inimical to our interests.
Right.
And it's very interesting, Arjun, I must tell you this, that Pakistan had long back bought French submarines, Augusta class submarines, right? There is complete blanket denial of any support or parts and components or servicing or overhaul from France.
Right.
It's Turkey which is helping.
Oh, it's Turkey which is...
So in a sense that Turkey was not a surprise to us. Now the big question is, if Pakistan is using F-16s,
right,
which are American, would we do the same for America?
Right. Welcome to Arjun Bhagat Decodes, or AB Decodes as we call it. Today we have Ambassador Jawed Ashraf with us. Jawed was India's ambassador to France, also India's High Commissioner to Singapore. He was Joint Secretary in the PMO and saw the transition between the Manmohan Singh government and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. So lots of experience there, Jawed. And of course, you love other things. You love photography. You love trekking in the Himalayas. I wanted to, talk about Operation Sindoor. If you really look at Narendra Modi government, he's been pretty clear. The Prime Minister has been very clear. If you are going to hit us, we're going to hit you back. We saw after the Uri attack, we saw, two operations happening. We had the Balakot and, so we've been going after them with special forces, with aircrafts. But Operation Sindoor seems to be quite different because we've now gone and attacked terrorist hubs inside Pakistan, apart from POK. So, how is this new doctrine playing out and evolving, and how do you see it going forward?
Arjun, first of all, thank you for having me here on AB Decodes, and always good to have a chat with you. Let me, before I get into Operation Sindoor, it's very important for us, for the viewers as well as for those outside India to understand how we got to this point. So we've been facing cross-border terrorism from Pakistan for more than 3 decades. And 89-90 was a sort of a turning point, coinciding with this new insurgency, a religious-based insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir, but also with the end of the war in Afghanistan, from where Pakistan diverted many of these people to wage a campaign in Jammu and Kashmir,
Right.
principally driven by the objective that if it can be successful in dismantling a great superpower like Soviet
Absolutely.
Union,
Right.
then it should be easy to wrest Jammu and Kashmir away from India
Right.
using a similar tactic. We've seen that now
So case in point is Masood Azhar,
Right.
who, JEM, and he was an ally of the Taliban for the longest time.
Yes, and LET was actually created first to be a force in Afghanistan, and then it got more remobilized into a different direction altogether.
Yeah.
So we've had this for three now. We've tried every conceivable method or means to bring this to an end. We have had bilateral engagement with Pakistan on this issue. We've even had President Musharraf issue us, declaration in 2002 January and a joint statement in 2004 that Pakistan will not allow its territories to be used for cross-border terrorism against India, and it will take all steps to dismantle it. That was one part of it. We've also tried everything internationally. We've tried to mobilize the international community to force a change in Pakistan's behavior, both through direct punitive sanctions, through incentives, disincentives, as also through UN Sanctions Committee, through the FATF, where Pakistan was placed on the grey list, because it was on the grey list because we were able to conclusively establish that Pakistan state was in some way complicit in terror financing or that it was doing nothing to curb it.
Right.
So I think we've tried various means. You would
No,
recall
we've been very passive. I mean, if you, as a journalist, if you look at what happened to our parliament, 2001 attack.
Right.
Before that, of course, we had Kargil. After that, we had the worst terrorist attacks
in
in our
Mumbai.
country, in Mumbai, and successive governments didn't do anything.
Right. So, and this is a point that in after the Parliament attack and then Kaluchak massacre on 14th May 2002.
I mean, we had the train bombings also. I mean,
Yeah.
the list is endless.
We've mobilized in a massive way for Operation Parakram, but we did not take any military action subsequently. There was de-escalation, was a lot of course, international efforts directed towards that. Now I come to the point where we reach the Narendra Modi's historic visit to Lahore at a very short notice on 25th December 2015.
Right.
A week later, we had the attack in Pathankot Air Base.
Right.
We actually took this unprecedented step of inviting Pakistan to jointly conduct investigations into it. What we got after that was absolute denial, obfuscation, and refusal to accept that.
Which has been their template. I mean, they've been pretty transparent about that. Right.
Absolutely.
And this time again, they've been saying that, why don't we have a joint investigation? That doesn't really work.
Doesn't really work. So you had Uri, where for the first time we took some kind of a military action. That was a bit, in a sense, more signally. We went across, did a surgical strike,
between
demolished
2-3
a camp.
kilometers inside,
Yes, absolutely.
destroyed some LET camps, were there?
Yeah. And then we had Pulwama in February 2019. And then we took a measured step of hitting a terror camp in Balakot.
Right.
We came back. They also responded in a symbolic way. But we send a message that we were prepared
Right.
to go beyond anticipated and war-gamed steps, because that was the impression Pakistan had, that ever since our two countries became nuclear weapon state, that it could pursue, and that was in 1998, and from 1999 onwards, it took the view that it could pursue a low-intensity conflict using sub-conventional or asymmetric means, in the confidence that India would not retaliate through conventional military means because of the nuclear ambiguity and nuclear threat. So this has actually been their strategy and posture, which is also reflected in the fact that they haven't yet formally declared a nuclear doctrine,
Right.
and they just do declaratory statements, one of which seems to indicate varying levels of thresholds and possibility of first use also. So they use this as a shield.
So, the ambassadors, whether it was or high commissioners, whether it's the Pakistani high commissioner to the UK or the ambassador to Russia, they were pretty blatant about it, including their defense minister and everybody else. And they kept saying that we have the nuclear option open. This was right after India threatened them after Pahalgam happened.
I mean, they use this all the time. So,
I mean, was that for the international community?
yes, it is.
Was
So it is to raise international alarm in order to draw international mediation to prevent an Indian military response, and then to bring about a mediation between the two countries, which in a sense rehyphenates India and Pakistan, internationalizes the Kashmir issue, and in a sense seems to serve Pakistan's objective of keeping themselves tied to us. Now, this is something which has been going on for some time. But I think this time what we did, and again, remember, we never responded to their nuclear bluster. None of us, nobody
I didn't
from
see
India,
a single statement,
not
at
a
least no
single.
official statement at all.
And making this nuclear bluster against a country which is also a declared nuclear weapon state with credible deterrence is foolish.
Right.
And so I think this time many things happen, and this is where we come in. It's important to recognize we've come to this after having tried everything else.
So from a diplomatic perspective and also as a narrative, obviously the Indian government discussed among themselves and said, look, we're not going to really react to these senseless statements that Pakistan is giving.
Yes. And I think it was a sensible, mature, not to be provoked in it, because that's exactly what they were looking for. And I think what we then decided is that this time we will see, first, the nature of attack was really brutal and barbaric. Remember, it had a very visible religious connotation to
Absolutely.
it. I mean, it isn't that people from a particular religious background were killed in a random attack. They were singled out deliberately using the most obnoxious methods and were killed in front of their family members, who were then left to go and tell the story. This is brazenness of the highest order. It is not just terrorism or an issue of Jammu and Kashmir. It is really inciting religious sort of conflict.
And that happened pretty within 2 weeks of Asif Munir giving that whole two-nation theory of how Hindus and Muslims were different.
It's one thing to speak of a two-nation theory in the way Jihad did, but this took it to a different level. And he was almost visceral in the way he spoke about it. And in a sense, I think it was a cue for something like this to happen.
Right.
Now, we had to react in a way that was unprecedented, number one, that it would take them by surprise, and that it would deliver a very clear message, both to the international audience and to the people in Pakistan. So that is what led to this, where we had a strike on 9 terror sites. Now remember, of all of these, Bahawalpur and Muridke have a very special place.
Right.
These are the most protected sites by the Pakistan military and security establishment. They are the nurseries, the original nurseries of terrorism.
Right. And they've been there for the last 30, 40 years.
We've had them on our radar forever. We have presented evidence on this a number of times. When I was in Washington, D.C., between 2007 and 2010, and I was working in the Congress, we were able to impress upon the Congress to include a set of conditions for assistance to Pakistan, which included stopping cross-border terrorism against India or against any neighboring country, and then a dismantling of camps like Muridke. So even that they have been able to survive or to protect against. And now they reach a point where we hit them at the core at the what you can say is the heart of the terrorism ecosystem there. So that was one. But remember, we said very clearly that we are going to, you know, bring the perpetrators, backers, and
Yes,
planners
and
to
I think that
justice.
was made very clear by the Prime Minister, by the Defense
Yes.
Minister, by the Home Minister, successive times,
Yes.
including the
Yes.
rally in Bihar on the 24th of
And I think it
April.
is equally important to bear in mind that the intent became very clear when we also put the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance.
Right.
Now, there we've been seeking a review for different reasons. We've been seeking a review for technical, geological, water flow reason, demography changes, everything
For the
that you
last
can
couple,
think.
3-4 years,
Yes.
I think.
And because they have been persistently, in a very malified way, obstructing any exercise of our own rights.
Right.
Right. So I think this was also a very decisive and a very important signal, not just to the ruling elite of Pakistan, but to the people of Pakistan.
Right.
Because they also need to take a certain degree of responsibility
Right.
for what the state and the military do. So I think that was one. And then when we struck, we actually clearly conveyed to them
Right.
within few minutes that we have attacked just the targets of terrorist hubs. We have not touched civilians or military targets at all. I mean, you need not, and you just need to stand aside. They got back 8 hours later to say that we are going to hit back at you.
Yeah.
And then you know how this escalation
Of course.
unfolded. We were, of course, always clear. I was very clear that the government would maintain an escalation dominance throughout the campaign, that if they hit, we'll hit harder.
Yeah.
And that if there is a vertical escalation that is in the same domain of missiles and drones, we will continue to overwhelm them. And that if it escalates horizontally into, let's say, naval warfare, ground warfare, we have overwhelming dominance in naval forces.
Yes, absolutely.
And absolutely, we would prevail also on the ground. But then, of course, and we were at every stage when we retaliated, it was very swift.
Right.
It reflects an extraordinary level of integration of our forces and the speed of mobilization.
Right.
Because I compare it with what we've done in the past, and we've done extremely well. Now, then you've seen the sequence of events which led
Right.
us to have a pause in Operation Sindoor.
Right.
Now, the important thing here, Arjun, to remember is that every time we hit back, we said it is a non-escalatory measure.
Right.
We also said that we have no desire to
No, the articulation of a strategy was very well thought
Yes.
out, and it was very nicely put
Yes.
on the global stage. I don't know how effective it has been at the global stage.
I'll
Very
come-
effective for India.
I'll come to that because I think that there's some important lessons in that as well, and I think we should do some introspection on that. But when we had this, of course, you had this confusion about President Trump tweeting or putting it out on social media that they have achieved this through.
So I want to ask you. I know you're talking about it, but I want to ask you. Just for our audience as well to understand that sequence. We had a tweet on President Trump's own social media handle where he said that he's brokered a deal. This was a good 1.5 2 hours before it was announced by India, and he said there's going to be a ceasefire. How do you see that playing out? We've got the DGMO, the Indian DGMO, stating that, look, I got a call from my counterpart, the Pakistani counterpart. They asked for a ceasefire. The Pakistanis are saying something else. As far as the narrative is concerned, I don't know how important that is at this point of time, but we'd still like some clarity.
No, I think it is narrative from a domestic and the international audience perspective, because there is this kind of new catchphrase, U.S. brokered ceasefire.
Right.
Now,
or US pressured
no,
ceasefire.
it's U.S. brokered ceasefire is the phrase. Brokered more than pressure, because pressure means we still did it ourselves. Look, I've been doing the U.S. account for more than a decade, since 1999. There are conversations, and there were conversations
Right.
between our two sides. But there was not about what steps are you going to take to de-escalate or stop the military action. When Vice President J.D. Vance spoke to the Prime Minister, he conveyed clearly, if they hit, we'll hit harder.
Right.
He left the onus on Pakistan to stop the military actions. Remember, our objective had been fulfilled, but
Right.
we were now responding to the declaration of war by Pakistan, because they had started by targeting military and civilian places. So whatever conversation took place between Pakistan and the United States is for them to describe. But clearly, from our point of view, it's never the case that we would allow the United States to come in and mediate either a ceasefire. If they put pressure on Pakistan, I don't know whether they did, and they probably did, or Pakistan felt the heat as a result of that very, very successful bombing of the air assets or the infrastructure, air bases, etc.
Right.
That we am taking
And
out
which has
the
been
radars.
clearly
Yeah.
shown, and
Yeah.
that's a
And
given.
if you get 11 out of their 12 air bases, that's
Right.
pretty
Right.
bad. That means you're in a sense incapacitated
Completely.
their air force, because they can't use the runway at least for some time till they repair there. So I think that probably led them to also seek a truce at this point of time. And my sense, Arjun, is that for those 3 nights, that every night when they were escalating the attacks, they were hoping that they would score one major successful hit.
Right.
on
One
an
hit at a major army installation
or an
Air
Indian
Force.
city, or an Indian city.
Yeah.
To say that we have matched India step for step. But I think this was the time we saw the our integrated and layered air defense system do an extraordinary
Really
job.
doing its
Some
job.
of those drones, etc., got through, had minor damage, but things like Adampur and all, nothing happened.
Right.
So I think, and at that point, they probably realized, and I said this on TV that night before this ceasefire, I said this is a crucial night, because if they have either a choice to de-escalate or escalate it even
But they
further.
did fire at Jammu again. After, I think that was again part of the narrative.
Part
right?
of the
That
narrative.
We've hit them last.
Yes, we have hit them last, or sometimes the field units don't get the clear signal. The field commander has his own, little
Yeah.
axe to grind. They wants to say, "I'll show you guys." Sometimes these things happen at the local level.
Yeah.
But my sense was that if they had two choices after their failed attempt the previous night, to escalate it even further,
Right.
or to de-escalate. If they had escalated it further, it would perhaps have invited an even larger retribution from our side.
Right.
Maybe perhaps even a naval
Right. I think the
operation.
naval commander made it very clear that
Yes.
we were ready.
We were ready.
We were ready
Yeah.
for increasing the punishment.
See, this is going to go on. I mean, the US President Trump will try to appropriate credit for something. I mean, he's in search of playing a role as a peacemaker, deal maker.
Right.
He's not done that successfully
In the Ukraine
in the
and the
Russia
Russia
so far.
war. Yeah.
So yeah, he has something here to show, and in a sense, when you come to this point where then Prime Minister addresses the nation on the 12th of May, now there are 4 very important takeaways from that, I think, which sets the new doctrine or the new template for our action. One, of course, is that he made it very clear that Operation Sindoor is just a pause, and that we will judge it by what happens next.
Absolutely.
Which means our force posture and our mobilization is in that particular state, which also is possible to do at a relatively lower cost, because today, we are talking about much more sophisticated systems rather than large deployments of forces.
Right.
So you have missiles, you have drones, you have air defense systems, and you have excellent satellite-based intelligence and imageries that you can rely on. So all of that it means that we are in that posture. The second, of course, is the 3-pronged strategy he spoke about, the doctrine, which is if you hit, we'll hit back. Second is that we will not cave into the succumb to the nuclear blackmail. Because I think that should have been clear, and I had written about this also before that this nuclear buster will mean nothing to us. You've seen that in the Ukraine war.
Right.
Russians had repeatedly said that if this red line is crossed, we'll have to use the nuclear option.
Right.
Red lines were repeatedly crossed. Nothing ever happened. These are guarantors of state survival, not war fighting instruments. Right. And the third point is that we will now erase the distinction between terrorists and state sponsors, because what we saw was this extraordinary image.
All those funerals taking place, as army commanders giving,
Absolutely. So that was the third, of course, is what you saw from him is about this new age warfare. That means, the transition that India is making together with this new technology was demonstrated here. And that also means the nature of war that we have seen even between India and Pakistan in the past, and what we've seen in movies from 65, 71, and others, a smaller, minor Kargil, is going to be replaced by more different nature. Today is actually a
No,
high.
and as an Indian, I feel a little bit more secure after
Yeah.
seeing the way
Yeah.
our defenses worked, how our offenses, that whole stratagem of how a
Yeah.
war is fought has changed.
Yes.
And it's been, we've been seeing America do that.
Yes.
And now Russia and
Yes.
Ukraine and Israel doing it.
Yes.
So that has definitely.
And so really it is going to be what is called and before I come to this, a very important point you raised, the new age warfare. And the fourth, of course, is that we've made it very clear that there are no talks till with or no trade or no water till this terrorism issue doesn't get resolved. The only thing we will discuss is POK and terrorism. It's very important because it simply rejects any hope that or any idea of mediation that the US or anyone else may have. As I had said yesterday, or was it that we, as late Jaswant Singh had said, that we are two countries that speak the same language. We don't need an interpreter.
Right.
So in a sense, this is a consensus around this policy that has stood there for a long time, and this will continue. No third party. When you speak of new age warfare, this is a very important point that it is now in a hybrid environment. So it is a full spectrum from pure conventional forces of the kind that we've seen in the past, where you use armor, you use artillery in the ground, but you also use the naval platforms, and you use fighter jets and AVACs and things. But at the same time, you are also using low-cost drones in large numbers to either suss out what's going on there, to find out their assets, or use it to just randomly target at a very low-cost option. If you lose them, it's fine.
Yep.
But the third element is very important, and which is information warfare, disinformation warfare.
Right.
It can have a devastating consequences on the psychology of a nation, on the spirit of the forces, and it creates a confusion about the state of play. We've seen that at play over here. And sometimes, you will find that it is not just the adversary who's doing, the people coming from all sides.
Right.
In addition to the fact that there will be cyber attacks, right? And I had also written that there will be cyber attacks, not just from Pakistan.
And they tried. They tried on defense sides.
Yeah.
They tried on different.
So if you see in the Western media in particular, not just what happened in Pakistan, the first 3 or 4 days, the narrative was completely had forgotten about terrorism. And the narrative almost in passing mentioned this audacious, daring, unthinkable act by India, going deep inside Pakistan, a nuclear-armed, militarily capable country, to do precision strikes on some of their most prized assets, which is the terror camps, and to do that successfully. So that got shifted into this narrative about loss of aircraft and things.
Yeah.
And it was extraordinary that
which aircraft was better, or Rafale or the Chinese
first,
ones?
first, I think, they didn't wait for the whole story. Second, the numbers no one knew, but they were putting out different numbers.
They were entire videos.
Yes. Third is that you don't know whether it was a technical issue,
Right.
operational issue, or human error.
Right.
Maybe it was purely, because some of these aircraft can fly below the radar and release their weapon. Rafale can, for example. I mean, we need to see the whole facts, and they should have been cautious in not making this seem like an absolute reality.
Right.
Or at least balancing this with what we achieved in terms of strikes on the terror targets. Now, I'm not commenting on the operational aspects. I'm not commenting on what actually happened on the battlefield, whether aircraft were lost, which aircraft.
It's the narrative, right? It's the social media narrative.
So the entire narrative was that how Pakistan routed India in a military campaign. Routed. I've seen. Or so they maybe
how their aircrafts are better than us.
Yeah.
I mean, it was quite nonsensical. A lot of that entire narrative.
Even let's assume whatever that was there may or may not be true is a separate issue. I'm seeing this as they have forgotten about the terror, the strikes on the terror camp. They're not asking Pakistan that question. What kind of air defense systems do you have? Were you sleeping at the wheel?
Precisely. I mean, when India hit them on the 7th. and we'd given them enough notice. The prime minister had said
Yes.
we'd hit you. Everybody had said in India, and then you have nine
Yeah.
targets. I don't know what their defense systems were doing. You're right. So they had no clue. They couldn't even counter one of those strikes. I mean, they took their time, 24 hours, to try and hit back at our militaries. But yeah, I think if you really see what the writing on the wall is, they did fail.
Yes. So now that's the question. So the narrative, and it helped project. I mean, gave confidence to Pakistan. They were relaying their international news to their domestic audience. So that sort of a situation is also part of this hybrid warfare now, where everyone has a phone.
Right.
So everyone is vulnerable. Everyone can see what. So you can play this game. And I think we have restored a lot of that narrative, corrected the
We
picture
have.
in the last 3 to 4 days, but it will still remain an uphill battle.
It will, and I think as a media person and someone who's been seeing how media has kind of evolved, the Indian media has evolved. I also feel that some of the press conferences that were given by our commanders, um, I don't know whether it was a diplomatic issue or it was the words like proportionate, or the fact that we attacked them because they attacked us. I think somewhere we needed to use a little bit more of bluster.
Yeah, and
I think we were being too nice.
yeah, and this is not a place, the world of nice people.
Yeah.
Now, even for, I mean, people will debate. We maintained complete silence on this whole narrative and story about loss of aircraft, etc. I'm not sure whether that has worked to our advantage or disadvantage, because then we've allowed some others to.
I mean,
seize
international
the-
media has
Yeah.
reported up to 5. You had the CNN, then you had New York
So someone
Times.
said even several.
Several.
Several is a very vague word. It could mean, someone said multiple.
Yeah.
So these are very subtle phrases to convey the picture of an indefinite
No,
number.
you create a doubt,
Yeah.
right? In the whole narrative, you create a doubt, and I think that is something that maybe we should have been a little more
So
proactive on.
yeah, absolutely. I think in a situation of war, suppose we even lost it. So what? You need to explain why it happened. You've seen Houthis attack American.
Right.
And Houthis are not a patch on what Pakistan is. You see the history of war. You will see that U.S. lost frontline fighter aircraft to Iraqi missiles in the Gulf War, or
I mean, recently they had the aircraft carrier took 2 wrong turns and 2 of the aircrafts fell into the water. I mean, of course, there's no
there's no
comparison to it.
Yeah,
But
no,
yes,
there's
you
no
have
sharp-
losses
yeah.
when you are in combat situations.
And look at what we achieved. You get into a country that is quite powerful militarily, and you are able to get 9 targets.
Yeah.
You don't see a loss of men or of pilots, and that's a huge achievement in itself. So we've sent a message, and I think maybe perhaps there were reasons why we did want to discuss it, but we then allowed that field to be completely taken over by those in Pakistan and outside. And to me, in a sense, that was one sad part of it, because we've otherwise had an absolute clear dominance in every other area.
But you also had, some of India's strategic experts like Brahma, who said that, it was a lost opportunity. We snatched defeat out of victory. I mean, it wasn't even necessary. I mean, that's my perspective, of course. But I wanted.
I'm glad you raised that point, because I think every military campaign starts with a very well-defined set of objectives.
Right.
No military campaign ought to be open-ended.
Right.
You've seen also how, in the case of Israel and Hamas, which is like completely mismatched. I mean, really, right? And the international solidarity and support, particularly from the US and Europe for Israel, was way beyond what we have from anybody, right? Yet, 3 years later, they're still struggling to clean it up, other than destroying Gaza and flattening it. And they have lost a lot of their moral position, authority, strength, without necessarily ensuring that they have secured lasting peace over here. Yes, they've been successful in Lebanon, They're successful in Iran.
Yeah.
They've been able to do some things to the Houthis.
Japanese Houthis, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the reality is there.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, you look at, for example, Russia against Ukraine. I mean, Russia, great military power, now bogged
Hundreds
down.
and thousands of people have died.
Yeah, bogged down in a military conflict now for 3 years.
But then, Russia seems to do that every 30 years. I mean, they did that in Afghanistan. How many of their men died? Soldiers died, equipment lost, economy suffered. But let me come back to the global perspective. You look at Pakistan in terms of its polity, how it functions, how the army dominates virtually every discourse, how they have, harbored the most vicious terrorists in the world. You have Osama bin Laden. You had Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was, hiding there. He was captured by the U.S. Special Forces. Why is such a long leash given to Pakistan, especially by the United States? Even now, they're saying, we need to work with them and they should do trade. It's just so bizarre. The Pakistani army, its intelligence services, hand in hand with its politicians, they've killed hundreds of Americans. Daniel Pearl, you'd name it.
Yes. No, you're raising a question that remains one of the great mysteries.
What do they have? What do they have? What does Pakistan have?
So first, you go back to the Cold War era.
Right.
So for about 5 decades, Pakistan was a frontline state for the United States and Western countries. And they've built a kind of an institutional affinity and relationships that remain very strong.
Especially with the army.
Yes.
The armed forces.
Pakistan has become a country that has managed, that used to, as Professor Stephen Cohen used to say, that it negotiates with a gun held to its own head.
Right.
Basically saying, if you don't help me, I'll shoot myself. So, it has turning its vulnerability.
It was doing that with the entire nuclear discourse and the threat to India.
Basically telling the world that, look, I'm a fragile, economically fragile, politically unstable country that is home to some of the largest contingent of militants and radicals in the world.
What if they take over?
We are a nuclear weapons power. So army is a force that acts in people's view as a stabilizing force in Pakistan, as a glue that holds the country together, a source of cohesion in Pakistan. That's one part of it. But second, they're also there, they have a sort of a nuisance value for the rest of the world. They made themselves like that. It's like a thug who's also helpful to the police by getting hold of some people. So, you remember President Trump in his State of the Union address in January this year, actually singled out Pakistan for praise, saying that they handed over a Afghan militant terrorist that they wanted to get hold of.
Again, an Al-Qaeda one.
Yes. So this is something to play to their advantage. They maintain very friendly relations with them.
Yeah.
And in the eyes of the world, and particularly the United States, they feel that, and they have done this forever, since 2001, when we actually started re-engaging with the United States in the post-Cold War era, is that there is a larger geopolitical framework for India relationship, an economic framework for the relationship, a technological framework for this relationship, and now increasingly in the context of China's rise, which I think would not be the case with President Trump. But Pakistan has a different set of values, and it has managed to establish great relationships. So every time we come to the same point, the same 4 set of reactions, as I was telling you and that I wrote about before these, after the Pahalgam attack. One is that attention will shift from the act of terror after condemnation to prevention of a conflict. Then contextualizing the act of terror in the framework of the long-standing dispute between India and Pakistan, particularly on the unresolved issue of quote-unquote Jammu and Kashmir.
Now that it's 1,500 years old.
Yes, of course. And the third is, I think for every year, this is a logarithmic scale. So the third point is that they start essentially equating the aggressive and the victim, and then start putting India and Pakistan in the same bracket. So this pattern you have seen before.
Right.
I don't think that bothers us or should disturb us, because what we have done this time is different from the past. We had no expectations from the international community.
Yeah.
We kept them informed when they asked us, what are you planning to do? I think they were probably aware that India was going to do something.
Yeah.
This time, I would say the US intervention pre-attack or during the attack or after the is the most minimal I have seen.
Yeah, pre-attack. I think President Trump said, it's their business. He was,
And I would say even because, I've seen so much shuttle diplomacy in the past.
Right.
Whenever there used to be India-Pakistan tensions.
There's a lot of hand-holding and, trying
this
to
time there was
cajole
none. And so I think that this is a kind of a response that they will have. What we did is this time we said, okay, we will take the control of the levers of post-attack developments and change the pattern of response in a way that prevents international mediation, that allowed Pakistan a free pass after taking some cosmetic steps in the past. What they would do is they'd arrest a few people for a few years or maybe a few months and then tell the community, international community, I've taken steps. But this time what we did is we went and did what we had to do. We showed that, okay, we are prepared to take responsibility for our security.
Yeah.
And that we are prepared to take, if you don't believe in endorsing our action, that's your problem. Or if you think Pakistan needs a free pass or needs to be handled with a soft touch, that's your problem. But we are the ones who are targeted.
Right.
I mean, even in Arjun, in 2001, when 9/11 happened and then suddenly the US turned back to Pakistan.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, President Musharraf made three different categorization. He told the Americans, you can go after Al-Qaeda. They're the ones who hit you.
Right.
We'll keep the Taliban in check.
Yeah.
But I can't do anything about the India groups.
Right.
Because, I can't handle so much. And basically, this is our problem.
And of course, pay me a couple of $1 billion a year.
So every year you paid them more and more for doing less and less.
Right.
In terms of even their Afghan policy.
I think that military aid has now stopped because of President Trump to a large extent.
So I think, but I don't think that we in today should get too overly bogged down by this issue.
Right.
We are a large country. We are in a sense, I feel also a country that pretty much on its own.
Right.
So we must have that capacity, the will and the resolve to take our own steps, manage the international fallout, and then move on from here.
No,
and I think the US and India will move on from here.
Right.
We will focus on and I hope that's what happens, on the positive agenda of our partnership.
Right.
Because there are some things that the US can do for India's own transformation.
Right.
Including on technology.
Right. There's another point which is confusing in some ways as far as the US is concerned when it comes to China. China is Pakistan's best friend. At the same time, the US gives Pakistan a long leash. I guess those are geopolitical compulsions. I mean, we have them as well. But I want to talk about...
No, I'm glad you said this because, we are pretty adept at be doing it too. I mean,
we've been doing that with...
I mean, we at the time when the entire West was after us to cut off ties with Russia, we continued doing that despite what was happening in Ukraine.
And Jaishankar was pretty forthright about that. But, there's this endless cycle as far as Pakistan is concerned. You have a democratically elected government, Prime Minister gets into trouble, General Zia comes in, hangs the Prime Minister Bhutto in that case. Then you have Nawaz Sharif, who was thrown out by Musharraf. Then you have Imran Khan, who is now in prison. Now you have a new general, Asim Munir. They call him the jihadi general in some ways. Now, how does India even deal with Pakistan going forward?
Yeah, it's a difficult problem.
Because you don't have a civilian government. I mean, fine, the optics are there. You have a prime minister, going and meeting and all that. But it's really the army that calls all the shots.
Yeah, and and
the perspective you have to look at it is from that funeral of the terrorists.
Yes.
Right.
So if you look at from the very beginning and from the history 1948 onwards, that I think every successive Prime Minister of India has made an effort to try and build a normal, peaceful relation, neighborly relation with Pakistan, if not necessarily a.
And as you pointed out, even Prime Minister Modi did, right?
Yes.
He flew to
Yes.
the wedding of one of the.
And for 2 years,
To
we had
Lahore.
a meeting in Ufa. We had, before that, we had the back channel. Then, during Dr.
General-
Manmohan's sixth time.
General Musharraf came to India. You
Yeah,
had the
no,
Agra
and
Sabha.
we've had a very serious back channel. Then Prime Minister Vajpayee made a very strong effort to build peace. And all of that was there. But reality is that we don't know who calls the shots.
And who to deal with.
And there have been
And for how long?
Yeah, and there have been times when you can actually see the military and the intelligence in Pakistan thwarting any progress because it suits their institutional interest. Because peace with Pak India would dilute the salience of the Pak military in the entire Pakistani ecosystem, where they control the levers of the economy besides power.
Of course, yeah.
So we are
the
faced.
Pakistani army foundations pretty
Yeah.
much control a lot of the economy.
Yes.
I think somebody was saying it's like 26 or 30% of
And-
the GDP.
Yeah, if you have the brigadier there, then you look at the brigadier here, you look at the brigadier there. But I think we, in a sense, have to also blame the rest of the world for creating the situation. Historically, the West, when they needed Pakistan to be a frontline state,
Right.
they relied on the most powerful institution
Which
there.
was
They
the
couldn't
army.
care less whether there was. I remember within hours of President Musharraf conducting a coup in October of 1999, the State Department's press briefing started relativizing it. We'd had a flawed democracy. We
Yeah.
had this.
Yeah.
We take President Musharraf's word for it or General Musharraf's word for it that he will restore democracy. We urge him to restore democracy, etc. Now, that is been a perennial case. So they see the Pakistan military as the only incredible instrument that can deliver the interests. So in a sense, they have foisted a culture in Pakistan where democratic forces have not gained sufficient maturity, strength, and vitality. And at the same time, the military has been a dominant force. So it's now seeped in its DNA, it's in its culture. And it's very easy for the military to be able to do that. It's also important to bear in mind that because the civil society and the democratic forces didn't get a chance to grow, there's always turbulence there as well.
Right.
And they can be manipulated. I remember that once, I was in Washington, D.C., I told the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee who was going to Islamabad or Pakistan, I said, you should meet the military leaders. You should meet the elected civilian representatives to show your support for democracy in Pakistan. He couldn't do that. He was not allowed to. He had to go and first call on General Kiani at that point of time. And so I think this is something which is a problem that has also arisen out of the calculations of the West, and then for 10 years you had the war in Afghanistan, proxy war between the US and the Soviets. So we've reached the state. Again, you have a country that in itself was an artificially construct and
Right.
it was carved out of literally a geographically integrated, culturally sort of defined region. And it could only have developed into a normal society if they had found a way similar to India
Right.
of a federal pluralistic democracy in which people could express their their aspirations.
That was never the case.
That was never the case.
And also because I think, of course, we're talking, that's a completely different conversation, but that's also because that was never the narrative of Pakistan.
No,
right?
it couldn't be because
Because you'd created the other, and that's your entire existence
is defined
depended
by
upon
that.
that, right?
And so if you didn't have the other, and if you didn't have hostility, and if you didn't have the impossibility of coexistence, then why do you exist?
Right.
I mean, then what is the reason for the existence of Pakistan? And which is also why they have to also constantly work at fomenting trouble in India. So so this is something which is also, if you see the pronouncements of the military and the Green Book, they, especially starting with Zia, they have in a sense indoctrinated themselves into this of an almost irreconcilable adversarial relationship with India, in which the military has.
So would I be wrong in kind of saying that the way the Pakistani army comes across is to say that we are the professional army of Islam. But I think I don't. I mean,
It's a very
in
strange
some
thing.
ways.
It's a very strange thing because in many ways they once were the most powerful military in the Islamic world. Okay, they have their nuclear weapons power, but if you see the quality of the armed forces in Saudi,
Right.
if you see it in UAE, Qatar, they have, in a sense, far more modern than Pakistan.
Right.
Second, I mean,
But they
Iran,
like to talk about it.
they like to
maybe
project
for
it.
their own
Exactly.
existence
Look,
and importance.
what is other? You see, if it's your identity is South Asian,
Yeah.
then what is the reason for your being who you are? So you have to try and manufacture an identity, and which is what they try to do. If you look at Iran also, I mean, it for all the years of sanctions and denials, it's still a very strong country militarily.
Yeah.
And so I think Pakistan likes to project itself as one. I mean, in part because it's the only one which has a nuclear weapons. But I think other militaries, particularly the Gulf states, are now doing really, really well.
So, Javed, I want to ask you, I just have the last two questions now. One is this whole case about Turkey, right? So, Turkey is now, of course, coming to our mind frames. And once the Turkish drones came over Jammu and other parts, President Erdogan he makes no bones about it. He keeps saying that, Pakistan is my brother and we support them. We don't really care about India. He's pretty much made it very, very obvious. How do you look at it diplomatically? And how did you look at it earlier? And how do you look at it now?
Well,
I mean, India's,
no,
position there.
I had written in Hindustan Times on the 8th morning, the 7th night and 8th morning, of the nature of help that China will provide, and that Azerbaijan and Turkey will be the other two countries, but they may not make a material impact on the actual course of the war. Right. China could, because of advanced satellite imagery, communications, and so on and so forth, and intelligence. So it was not a surprise to me that they are using Turkey. And I also know, and it's very interesting, Arjun, I must tell you this, that you see, Pakistan had long back bought French submarines, Augusta class submarines, right?
They're still using them.
They're still using them, but there is complete blanket denial of any support or parts and components or servicing or overhaul from France.
Right.
There is zero.
I believe most of them are under repair or in the...
No, but it's Turkey which is helping them.
Oh, it's Turkey which is...
So they are trying to cannibalize parts, give it to Turkey. Turkey is trying to see if they can, because France is offering absolutely no help at all.
And that's because of, you were India's ambassador to France.
Yeah, because we have a very strong strategic partnership with France. And let me tell you that even this time in the UN Security Council, they were the most forthright, unambiguous in terms of supporting India, because they have themselves been a victim of terrorism.
Right.
They have seen very hostile action from Pakistan. They didn't have an ambassador there for 2 years. There was a resolution in the Pakistan Assembly against France.
Yeah.
And I used to tell the French that they probably hate you more than they hate us now.
Right.
That's one part. But they're also very sensitive to our interests.
Right.
And I can tell you what they are willing to do with us with regards to our threats we face from Pakistan will exceed anything other countries will do, including the United States. So, so in a sense that Turkey was not a surprise to us. Now, the big question is, there is now both at a public level a very strong sentiment against Turkey.
Right. Because, Turkey and Azerbaijan are major holiday, destinations
but can I ask a question?
For the richer Indians or the middle class.
Yeah, but we are not asking another question. If Pakistan is using F-16s,
right,
which are American, would we do the same for America?
Right.
I'm just leaving that question in the air. So we're taking out our ire on Turkey and Azerbaijan for good reasons.
Yeah. So we have to be agnostic about what the other power is using. In a way.
In a way, yes. But I think, we have been disappointed by Turkey, not just because of this.
Turkey, it's not just about the equipment that is being
Yeah.
used, which
It's
is Turkish,
It's the
which is
diplomatic and the moral support they get.
moral
all the-
support and the constant, advice that is
Yeah.
given to India, or the support that is given to by
Yeah.
Erdogan, because he also looks at himself, I think, as one of the old sultans of
Yeah,
Turkey, and
yeah. He has that Ottoman fantasy. But I'll say this: I used to, when I was here in the PMO, and I remember the Turkish ambassador used to come sometimes and say, "Why can't we have a good relationship?"
they even refused to send their defense attaché for the briefings. They were wanting to send some junior diplomat for that.
So
So it's optics as well.
it is optics, and I used to tell them straight that we can't have a normal relationship with you as long as you have this absolutely umbilical relationship with Pakistan, which is fine, except that the way you work on that relationship is totally inimical to our interests.
Right.
You will never fail to raise the Kashmir issue on behalf of Pakistan.
Multiple for
Absolutely. Multiple forums. You are providing all kinds of support, including on trying to refurbish their old equipment, and also providing them with, as you've seen, drones and so on and so forth. So I think public sentiment is very strong about it.
right.
And I think you've seen the impact.
Right.
We've
Well,
also
we saw
seen.
that happening with Maldives. The economy has really been hit because of the tourism.
Well,
there. So-
Turkey is, of course, nearly a developed country. It's a
course.
part of NATO and has its own strengths. But I mean, frankly, we can understand the sentiments that people feel about it. At the same time, I think government also has taken some decisions. I mean, you've seen the cancellation of Celebi aviation on national security grounds. So all of this is there, and so.
Yeah, some aspects we need to work on. What about the European Union? I mean, as usual, their entire response has been very tepid. I mean, is it because, I mean, you worked so closely with them when you were there, up till very recently? They seem to have no voice left. I mean, the Europeans had a voice for everything. Why have they become so incapacitated?
So first, we have to distinguish between European Union and Europe.
Yes, yeah, that's true. I mean, you talked about France. They've taken a position,
but I think you've raised a very valid question, because Europe in general is facing great strategic irrelevance.
Right.
In the face of China's rise and this new geopolitical competition between US and China, Europe also is falling behind.
And the way President Trump is probably treating the European Union.
But it was obvious because they were the softest target.
Right.
Easy to beat up. They are also, in terms of competitiveness, falling behind the United States and China. They have no internal cohesion. Their total strength is of no value because there is no unified voice on foreign policy or defense policy. They've shown remarkable cohesion and internal mobilization when it came to the Ukraine war.
Right.
It's extraordinary what they have been able to do.
Stepped up.
But yeah, so I think whether it comes to being competitive internationally, economically, technologically, or whether it comes to industrial resilience or supply chains, or whether it comes to geopolitical issues or their voice, they are absolutely not in the center of anything, and they really have very little impact. They could, if they were able to create at least a sense of, a common vision on foreign policy and defense, again, reignite. They are still a treasure house of technology, innovation.
Yes.
They have some of the finest
technologically,
absolutely.
Socially, they have a lot to. But
so this is what President Macron has been speaking about. Draghi report spoke about it. Many are doing it. Maybe that what President Trump has done to them, which is actually accelerated a long evolving drift in transatlantic relationship.
Right.
So Trump, in a sense, has sort of pushed it over the precipice. So that is what may be a wake-up call. And you see that in Germany, a country that was entirely reliant on the United States and many others. So we will see maybe an awakening. But on this particular case, you're right. They were tepid. They also called for restraint. It's like almost a standard template.
Right.
I would say that in all of this, of course, France was very helpful. And they have been, in a sense, given strong support. both in the UNSC and outside. And we value the fact that they don't do business on defense with Pakistan, and they keep their engagement to the minimum. But I think we need to also invest a little more in European relationships, because we should not end up translating one vulnerability into a vulnerability with another major power.
Right, absolutely. I think, again, I don't think then EU is the right forum for that. You, as you said, then you have build up those relationships. Like you built up a relationship with France and UK and others. You look at it
Exactly.
from an individual kind of a
So I
perspective.
think we are doing that with Italy now.
Yeah.
We're doing that with Spain, and we're doing now that with Germany.
Germany.
Absolutely. I hope that, and Germany is itself having to completely deal with its own existential issues.
Yeah.
It had three pillars: US for security, Russia for energy, China for market.
Right.
All three pillars are, wobbly if not crashed,
Yeah.
and they need to sort of reinvent themselves. And there is, for the first time, I'm seeing a much greater level of convergence between UK, France, and Germany than I have seen in the past. They were, in a sense, all three highly competitive with each other, sometimes sniping at each other. And Franco-German relations had actually reached a nadir under Olaf Scholz,
Right.
Chancellor Scholz, and President Macron.
Right.
I think we are seeing a little turnaround once again, because they find themselves left alone,
Yeah.
Europe, and they need to find a way to have a voice of their own and a policy of their own. So this is what I think can be a big change, and I think we need to invest in that, because we need a diversified portfolio of strong relationships.
Right. Of course, the way India is looking at itself, and also from a geopolitical perspective, is that, our footprint is increasing, and it has been for the last few years. And, that brings me to your career as a diplomat. You've had a very rich career. I mean, you've represented India at so many different forums. I really want to talk about when you were in the Prime Minister's office. You were there, you were brought in by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and then you continued when Prime Minister Narendra Modi came in. How were the two experiences?
Well, first, I'd like to say we don't talk too much about our experience in the Prime Minister's office, but I'd say this, that one, of course, is that you can see that we have continuity in civil service, and that there is no politicization at higher levels of civil service, and that I had an extremely good experience working with both the prime ministers. It was extremely professional. We are totally insulated from politics. That's a different world for them. They deal with us as civil servants, as officers, on issues of administration and governance, and nothing more than that. Each prime minister will bring a different style, different approach. But I would say that, I saw a marked degree of continuity for us as officers in working with this. And I saw absolutely no difference in the sense of my comfort level working in that. And that's a remarkable tribute to the resilience and of the Indian governance system. I mean, for all the criticisms that you see of...
and that's the hallmark of
yes,
a good democracy
yes,
also, right?
Yes. I mean, you can argue that we can be a better bureaucracy, we can be a better civil service, we need reforms, we need to be more responsive, proactive, better skilled, better organized, better structured, more able to deliver on a timely manner, more sensitive to people. All of that we can argue about. But the very fundamental structure, that we have a sense of continuity, and that is based not on political affiliations, etc., but on merit, is a great hallmark of
And primacy
continuity
of the nation.
Yes, absolutely.
So, before we sign off, which was the most memorable speech that you wrote for either the Prime Minister? Because you did write a lot of the speech.
No.
That's what the media says. I don't know how true that is.
No, we
but-
leave all of that out. What we do out of the equation. I mean, we do all kinds of work, and I know media has been speculating, reporting while I was still in the Prime Minister's
Yes, I
office.
mean, I've read those, and they're there for others to read as well.
Yes, he will just leave it.
One of the
They
finest
are all-
speechwriters is now leaving, Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
No, I think we leave all that, because, I think whoever does it, we articulate the views and the voices and the vision of the leaders. That's full stop. I mean, that's their policies, their doctrines. It's not something we create out of our imagination.
No, no, and fair enough, but that's also the hallmark of a perfect diplomat. Thank you so much, Javed,
Thank you very much.
for spending
Pleasure.
time.
Arjun,
And
was
it's
a
been a
lovely
great
speaking to you.
conversation.
Thank
And
you.
you've decoded a lot of important geopolitical, the whole narrative that we're talking about. And so it's been a very enlightening conversation, as you can probably tell. Thank you, Javed, once again for joining me on AB Decodes. And I'll see you soon with another very interesting personality and a very interesting topic. Thank you.